The autumn wind howled through the Wyoming highlands like a wounded animal, carrying with it the scent of sage and the promise of an early frost. The land stretched endlessly, a canvas of browns and grays beneath a steel-colored sky that seemed to press down upon the earth with the weight of coming winter. In this desolate expanse, where the horizon met nothing but more emptiness, stood the small settlement of Benthorn, a collection of weathered buildings that clung to existence like stubborn weeds in cracked soil. At the edge of this forsaken place, where the town's judgment couldn't quite reach, but its whispers certainly could, sat a modest homestead. The cabin, built from rough-hewn logs chinked with mud and straw, had seen better days. Its roof sagged slightly in the middle, and the wooden shutters hung askew, rattling against the windows with each gust of wind. This was the home of Abigail Whitlow, widow these past 3 years. Abigail stood at her kitchen window, watching the storm clouds gather over the distant mountains. At 28, she still possessed the kind of beauty that might have turned heads in a larger town. Auburn hair that caught the light like burnished copper, eyes the color of spring grass, and a figure that hadn't yet been broken by the hardships of frontier life. But here in Benthorn, her beauty was overshadowed by suspicion and contempt. She was the widow of Samuel Whitlow, a man whose name was still spoken in hushed tones, accompanied by knowing looks and pursed lips. The townsfolk had never forgotten the rumors about Samuel's dealings with gun runners, the mysterious visitors who came in the night, or the cache of rifles found buried near their property after his death. That he'd been found with a bullet in his back on the road to Cheyenne only fueled the speculation. Some said it was justice, others whispered it was betrayal among thieves. Either way, the stain of his reputation clung to Abigail like smoke to wool. She turned from the window and surveyed her sparse domain. The main room served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting room all at once. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, cold now in the fading afternoon light. Her few possessions, a rocking chair that had belonged to her mother, a small shelf of books. Samuel's rifle mounted above the mantel seemed to emphasize the emptiness rather than fill it. In the 3 years since Samuel's death, she'd learned to work the small plot of land herself, tending to a vegetable garden, maintaining a chicken coop, and managing the few head of cattle that provided her meager income. The isolation had become both her punishment and her refuge. The good women of Benthorn crossed the street when they saw her coming, clutching their skirts as if sin itself might brush against them. The men were worse. Their eyes followed her with a mixture of desire and disdain, seeing not a grieving widow, but an available woman tainted by her husband's crimes. She'd learned to keep her trips to town brief and her interactions briefer. As darkness began to creep across the prairie, Abigail lit the oil lamp and settled into her evening routine. She had mended what needed mending, fed the chickens, and secured the cattle in the barn. Now there was nothing left but the long stretch of night ahead, filled with the sounds of wind and solitude. She opened her Bible, not from any particular devotion, but because it was something to do. Words to fill the silence. The first drops of rain began to patter against the windows, growing quickly into a steady drumming. Lightning flickered in the distance, followed by the low rumble of thunder. Abigail pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders and moved her chair closer to the dying embers in the fireplace. She'd need to add more wood soon, but for now, she simply sat and listened to the storm's approach. It was then that she heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the storm. A heavy thud against her door, followed by what might have been a groan. Abigail froze, her hand instinctively moving to the kitchen knife on the table beside her. Living alone had taught her caution. She waited, counting her heartbeats, but heard nothing more except the rain and wind. Then came another sound, a fist pounding weakly against the wood, desperate and faltering. This was no late-night visitor with ill intentions. This was someone in distress. Still, Abigail hesitated. Opening her door on a night like this, to a stranger, went against every instinct she'd developed in her years of solitude. The pounding came again, weaker this time, and then stopped altogether. Something in that silence moved her more than the knocking had. Rising slowly, she took the lamp in one hand and the knife in the other, and approached the door. Through the small window beside it, she could make out a dark shape slumped against her doorframe. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. No answer came, only the sound of labored breathing barely audible above the storm. Against her better judgment, Abigail unlatched the door and opened it a crack. The wind immediately tried to tear it from her grasp, sending rain slashing into the cabin. In the lamplight, she saw a man collapsed on her doorstep, his clothes soaked through with rain and what looked disturbingly like blood. His face was pressed against the wooden planks. One arm stretched out as if he'd been trying to knock again when his strength failed. For a moment, Abigail stood paralyzed. Every reasonable thought told her to close the door, to bar it and pretend she'd seen nothing. A wounded stranger appearing at her door in the dead of night could only mean trouble. The kind of trouble a woman in her position couldn't afford. But as she watched, the man stirred slightly, turning his face toward the light. His eyes, when they found hers, held a mixture of pain and desperate hope that cut through her defenses. "Please," he managed to whisper. The word barely formed on blue-tinged lips. The healer's instinct, buried beneath 3 years of self-preservation, suddenly flared to life. Abigail set down the knife and lamp, and with strength born of necessity, managed to drag the stranger inside. He was a large man, tall and broad-shouldered, making her task difficult. By the time she'd pulled him far enough to close the door against the storm, both of them were soaked and she was breathing hard from the effort. In the lamplight, she could see him more clearly. He appeared to be in his 30s, with dark hair plastered to his head and several days' growth of beard shadowing a strong jaw. His clothes, though mud-stained and torn, were of decent quality, the kind a ranch hand might wear on Sunday, or a traveling man might favor. The blood seemed to be coming from his left side, where his shirt was torn and stained crimson. "You're hurt," she said unnecessarily, kneeling beside him. His eyes focused on her with effort. "Shot," he confirmed, his voice rough. "2 days ago, thought I could make it to somewhere else." A bitter smile twisted his lips. "Appears I was wrong." Abigail's mind raced. A gunshot wound meant trouble of the worst kind, but looking at him lying there, shivering and bleeding on her floor, she couldn't bring herself to turn him out. Tomorrow she could worry about consequences. Tonight, she would do what needed doing. "Can you make it to the bed if I help you?" she asked. He nodded, and together they managed to get him to his feet. He swayed dangerously, and she quickly positioned herself under his arm, taking as much of his weight as she could bear. Step by painful step, they made their way to the small bedroom off the main room. When he finally collapsed onto the bed, they were both gasping for breath. "I need to look at that wound," Abigail said, already moving to gather supplies. Clean cloths, her sewing kit, the bottle of whiskey she kept for medicinal purposes. The stranger watched her through half-closed eyes. "You don't have to—" "Hush," she interrupted, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "You came to my door. That makes you my responsibility, at least for tonight." As she helped him remove his shirt, revealing a muscled torso marked by more than just the current injury, old scars that spoke of a violent life, he studied her face. "What's your name?" he asked. "Abigail Whitlow," she replied, examining the wound. The bullet had passed through, which was good, but the wound was angry and showing signs of infection. "Caleb," he offered in return. "Caleb Reed." She paused for just a moment, then continued her work. Even out here, names carried weight, and she had the feeling his might carry more than most. But she didn't ask, and he didn't offer more. As she cleaned the wound, his jaw tightened, but he made no sound. His eyes never left her face, watching with an intensity that made her uncomfortably aware of their proximity, of the intimacy of her hands on his skin. "You live alone out here?" he asked as she threaded her needle. "Yes," she said simply, not offering the story behind that solitude. "Dangerous for a woman alone." She met his gaze steadily. "Dangerous for anyone these days." Now hold still. This will hurt." He gripped the bed frame as she began to stitch, but still made no sound. When she finished and had bandaged the wound, she sat back, suddenly exhausted. He was studying her again with those dark eyes that seemed to see too much. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I know what you're risking." She stood abruptly, gathering the bloody cloths. "You can stay until you're healed enough to travel. There's water in the pitcher, and I'll bring you some broth if you think you can keep it down." As she turned to leave, his hand caught her wrist, not forcefully, just enough to stop her. His touch was surprisingly gentle for such calloused hands. "Why?" he asked. "Why help a stranger who could bring nothing but trouble to your door?" Abigail looked down at his hand on her wrist, then back at his face. In that moment, she couldn't have explained it herself, whether it was simple human kindness, the loneliness that had been eating at her for 3 years, or something in his eyes that spoke to a matching darkness in her own soul. "Because," she said finally, "on a night like this, turning away a wounded man would make me no better than those who turned away from me." She pulled free gently and left the room, closing the door behind her. In the main room, she leaned against the wall and tried to calm her racing heart. She had just invited danger into her home. She knew. A man shot and running, seeking shelter in the night. It was the stuff of dime novels and cautionary tales. But as she listened to the storm rage outside and thought of all the nights she'd spent alone in this cabin, she couldn't find it in herself to regret her decision. Whatever tomorrow brought, tonight she was not alone. And for now, that was enough. The days that followed took on a strange rhythm, unlike anything Abigail had known in her 3 years of solitude. Caleb Reed proved to be a man of few words but many capabilities. Despite his injury, he insisted on earning his keep as soon as he could stand without swaying. She'd find him at dawn, already up and moving about despite her protests that he needed rest. "A man who doesn't work doesn't eat," he'd said simply when she'd scolded him for attempting to repair the barn door that had been hanging crooked since last winter. She watched him now from the kitchen window as he worked on the fence posts, his movements careful but determined. The morning sun caught the sweat on his brow, and she found herself noting the way his shoulders moved beneath his shirt, the patient way he tested each post before moving to the next. It had been so long since she'd seen a man's hands at work around her property that she'd forgotten the simple comfort of it. Inside, she busied herself with preparing the noon meal, trying to ignore the unfamiliar flutter in her chest. She'd grown accustomed to cooking for one, and now found herself adding extra portions without thinking, considering what might please him. It was dangerous, this domestic rhythm they'd fallen into. Dangerous because it felt too natural, too right, when he came in for dinner, bringing with him the smell of honest work and autumn air. She set the plate before him without meeting his eyes. They ate in companionable silence, as had become their custom. But today, something felt different. There was a charge in the air between them, like the feeling before a lightning strike. "That heifer's looking poorly," he said finally, breaking the silence. "The brown one with the white face. Might want to separate her from the others." Abigail looked up, surprised. Samuel had never noticed such things, too caught up in his schemes and secrets to pay attention to the actual work of the ranch. "You know cattle?" A shadow passed over his face. "Grew up on a ranch in Colorado. Before—" He didn't finish, but she didn't press. They both had their befores. That afternoon, they worked together to move the sick heifer to a separate pen. Caleb's strength had returned remarkably quickly, and he handled the animal with a gentle expertise that spoke of long experience. When the heifer suddenly balked, swinging her head and catching Abigail off guard, he was there in an instant, steadying her with one arm around her waist while guiding the animal with the other. For a moment, they stood pressed together, his arm still around her, both breathing hard from the exertion. She could feel the heat of him through her dress, smell the leather and sweat scent of him. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, acknowledgement of what they both felt but couldn't say. He released her slowly, stepping back. "You all right?" "Yes," she managed, smoothing her skirts with hands that trembled slightly. Thank you. That evening, as had become their habit, they sat by the fire after supper, she with her mending, he cleaning and oiling the tools he'd been using. The domesticity of it should have felt strange, but instead, it felt like something clicking into place, a key finding its lock after years of searching. "Your husband," Caleb said suddenly, not looking up from the hammer he was working on. "He didn't die natural, did he?" Abigail's hand stilled on the shirt she was patching. "No, shot in the back on the road to Cheyenne. They ever find who did it?" "No, though there were plenty who said he had it coming." The bitterness in her voice surprised even her. Caleb looked up then, his dark eyes studying her face. "And you? What do you say?" She was quiet for a long moment, considering. No one had ever asked her opinion on Samuel's death. They'd all assumed she'd grieve like a proper widow, regardless of what kind of man he'd been. "I say," she began slowly, "that Samuel Whitlow was not a good man. He was not kind, and he was not honest. But he was my husband, and his death left me alone in a world that has little use for women like me. Women like you. Women who've been touched by scandal. Women who live on the edges of respectability. Women who—" She broke off, shaking her head. "It doesn't matter." "It matters," he said quietly, and something in his voice made her look up. He was watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You're not what they say you are. You don't know what they say." "I know enough. I've been in town for supplies. I've heard the talk." His jaw tightened. Small minds and smaller hearts. The lot of them. The fierce protectiveness in his voice sent warmth spreading through her chest. When was the last time anyone had defended her honor? She couldn't remember. Later that night, unable to sleep, Abigail found herself standing at her bedroom window, looking out at the barn where Caleb had made his bed in the hayloft, refusing to take her room any longer than necessary. A lantern still glowed faintly through the cracks in the wood. What kept him awake? What ghosts haunted his nights the way Samuel's memory haunted hers? The next morning brought unexpected drama. She woke to find one of her cows down, bloated and suffering. Caleb was already with the animal when she reached the barn, his face grim. "Bloat," he said. "Bad case. We might lose her." They worked together through the morning, trying every remedy they knew. When it became clear the cow wouldn't make it, Caleb did what needed doing, swift and merciful. Abigail found herself turning away, not from squeamishness, but from an unexpected wave of emotion. "Hey," Caleb said softly, his hand touching her shoulder. "It's all right." "It's not," she said, surprised to find tears on her cheeks. "That was one of my best milkers. I needed her. The tears came harder then, and she realized she wasn't crying just for the cow but for everything. The hardship, the loneliness, the constant struggle just to survive, without a word. Caleb turned her toward him and pulled her against his chest. She stiffened for a moment, then let herself lean into his strength. He smelled of hay and hard work, and his arms around her felt like the safest place in the world. "I'm sorry," she said against his shirt. "I don't usually—" "Nothing to be sorry for," he murmured, his hand moving in slow circles on her back. "Sometimes the world just weighs too heavy." She pulled back to look at him, and found his face closer than expected. His eyes dropped to her mouth, and she saw the moment he started to lean in, saw the moment he caught himself and pulled back. "We should bury her," he said roughly, stepping away, "before the coyotes come." They spent the afternoon digging in the hard ground, working side by side in silence. But the awareness between them had shifted, deepened. Every accidental brush of hands as they worked sent sparks through her. Every glance lasted a heartbeat too long. That evening, exhausted and covered in dirt, they sat on the porch steps watching the sun set. The sky blazed orange and pink, painting the endless prairie in shades of fire. "My mother used to love sunsets," Caleb said unexpectedly. "Said they were God's way of showing off." "What happened to her?" Abigail asked gently. His face hardened. "She died. They both did. My parents—" He was quiet for a long moment, then added, Burned out of their home by men who wanted their land. I was 17, out on a cattle drive. Came back to ashes. Abigail's heart clenched. Caleb, I'm so sorry. He shrugged, but she could see the old pain in the set of his shoulders. Long time ago now. But some things you don't forget, don't forgive. She thought of Samuel then, of the bruises he'd left that no one else could see, of the cruel words that had cut deeper than any physical blow. No, she agreed quietly. Some things you don't. They sat in silence as darkness crept across the land. Finally, Caleb stood, offering her his hand to help her up. When she took it, he didn't immediately let go. Abigail, he said, his voice low and rough. I need to tell you. No, she interrupted, surprising them both. Not tonight. Whatever it is, wherever you came from, why you're running, not tonight. Tonight, let's just be. He studied her face in the fading light, then slowly lifted his other hand to brush a strand of hair from her cheek. The touch was feather-light, but it sent shivers through her entire body. You're a remarkable woman, Abigail Whitlow, he said softly. I'm just trying to survive. She replied, No. His thumb traced the line of her jaw, and she couldn't help but lean into the touch. You're living. Despite everything, you're living. That's more than most can say. The moment stretched between them, taut as a bowstring. Then, with visible effort, he dropped his hand and stepped back. Good night, Abigail. She watched him walk to the barn, his figure disappearing into the darkness. Only then did she press her fingers to her cheek where he'd touched her, feeling the lingering warmth there, inside. She moved through her nighttime routine mechanically, her mind spinning. She'd been dead inside for so long. She'd forgotten what it felt like to want, to be wanted, the way Caleb looked at her, like she was something precious, something worth protecting. It awakened feelings she'd thought buried with her hopes for a different life. Lying in her bed, she stared at the ceiling and admitted the truth to herself. She was falling for Caleb Reed. It was foolish and dangerous and probably doomed, but she couldn't stop it any more than she could stop the sun from rising. Through her window, she could see the faint glow of his lantern in the barn, and she wondered if his thoughts were as tangled as hers. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. There were supplies to buy in town, gossip to face, the constant struggle to keep the ranch going. But tonight, in the darkness of her room, she allowed herself to imagine what it would be like if he stayed, if this strange, sweet domesticity could become real. It was a dangerous dream for a woman in her position. But then again, she'd already opened her door to danger that night in the storm. What was one more risk to a heart that had already survived the worst? The morning Caleb officially asked to stay on as a hired hand. Abigail was kneading bread dough with perhaps more force than necessary. He stood in her kitchen, hat in hand, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. I know you can't pay much, he said, but I could take my wages in room and board. That barn's comfortable enough, and I'm handy with more than just cattle. She kept her eyes on the dough, afraid he'd see too much if she looked at him. And when you're healed completely, when you're ready to move on, then I'll tell you straight and give you time to find someone else. The condition hung between them, his promise to leave when the time came. It should have comforted her. Instead, it felt like a stone in her chest. All right, she said finally, but you eat at my table, not in the barn like some stray dog. The smile that crossed his face transformed him, making him look years younger. Yes, ma'am. As the days turned into weeks, they settled into a routine that felt dangerously like belonging. Caleb proved true to his word. He was handy with everything from mending fences to gentling horses. The ranch began to show signs of prosperity it hadn't seen since before Samuel's death. But it was the small things that wormed their way into Abigail's heart. The way he'd leave wildflowers on the porch steps without saying anything. How he'd hum old trail songs while working. The careful way he'd help her down from the wagon when they went to town. Town. That remained a trial. The first time they'd gone together for supplies. The reaction had been immediate and harsh. Women pulled their children closer as they passed. Men watched with suspicious eyes. In the general store, Mrs. Henderson, the banker's wife, had made a point of speaking loudly to her companion. "Some people have no shame at all," she'd said, her voice carrying clearly. "Taking strange men into their homes, carrying on like common—" "Ma'am," Caleb had interrupted, his voice deadly quiet as he stepped forward. "I believe you were about to say something unchristian about Mrs. Whitlow." Mrs. Henderson had puffed up like an angry hen. "And who might you be to speak to me that way? I'm the hired hand at the Whitlow Ranch, and I'm a man who believes a widow trying to keep her land deserves respect, not gossip." The store had gone silent. Abigail had wanted to sink through the floor, but also felt a fierce pride at his defense of her honor. "Well, I never—" Mrs. Henderson had started. "No, ma'am, I don't suppose you have," Caleb had said. "Never had to work your hands raw to keep food on the table. Never had folks judge you for circumstances beyond your control. Never had to prove your worth every single day just to be treated with basic decency." He'd turned then, offering Abigail his arm. "Mrs. Whitlow, I believe we have everything we need." They'd left the store in ringing silence, but Abigail had seen something shift in a few faces. Doubt, perhaps, or even shame. Now, weeks later, the whispers hadn't stopped, but they'd changed in tone. Some spoke of how well the Whitlow Ranch was doing, how respectable Caleb Reed seemed despite his mysterious arrival. Others, of course, spoke of impropriety and scandal, but their voices seemed less certain. One afternoon, as Abigail was hanging laundry, she heard horses approaching. Her blood chilled when she recognized Reverend Morrison's austere figure riding up the path. The minister was a severe man who believed suffering built character and that women were the root of most sin. "Mrs. Whitlow," he said without preamble when she met him at the porch. "I've come on a matter of some delicacy." "Reverend," she acknowledged, not inviting him in. His eyes swept the yard, taking in the repaired fences, the neat garden, the obvious signs of prosperity. His mouth tightened. "It has come to my attention that you have a man living on your property. I have a hired hand. Yes, Mr. Reed has been invaluable in maintaining the ranch. And does this Mr. Reed sleep in the house?" Heat flooded her cheeks. "He sleeps in the barn, Reverend Morrison, as is proper. Yet you take meals together. You've been seen in town together. The appearance of impropriety—" "The appearance?" Abigail's temper, usually kept under tight control, flared to life. "Where was your concern for appearances when I was struggling alone? When I was trying to work land meant for two people? Did the church offer help? When I couldn't afford seed for planting, did anyone offer Christian charity?" "Mrs. Whitlow." "No, Reverend, you'll hear me out." She stepped forward, and he actually took a step back. "For 3 years, I've scraped and struggled and survived despite this town's judgment. Now, when I finally have help, respectable help, you ride out here to lecture me about appearances. The temptations of the flesh are not your concern." She interrupted. "Mr. Reed has been nothing but respectful and professional, which is more than I can say for some of the good men in town who've made improper suggestions when their wives weren't looking." The Reverend's face flushed dark red. "You forget yourself. Woman, your husband's sins were his own, not mine." She lifted her chin. "Now, unless you've come to offer help instead of judgment, I'll ask you to leave my property." He spluttered, clearly unused to being dismissed by anyone, let alone a woman. "The fires of hell will have to wait. I have work to do." She turned her back on him and walked into the house, shutting the door firmly behind her. Through the window, she watched him ride away, his posture rigid with indignation. "That was something to see." Caleb's voice came from behind her. She spun around to find him standing in the doorway to the kitchen, having come in the back way. "You heard? Enough." He moved closer, his eyes warm with admiration. "You've got steel in you, Abigail Whitlow." "I'm tired of being judged," she said, suddenly exhausted, Tired of being looked at like I'm something dirty because my husband made bad choices. Tired of—" Her voice broke, and before she could stop them, tears were sliding down her cheeks. In 2 strides, Caleb was there, pulling her into his arms. This time she didn't stiffen, didn't pull away. She let herself lean into his strength, let herself take the comfort he offered. "You're the finest woman I've known," he murmured against her hair. "Don't let anyone tell you different." She pulled back to look at him, seeing the fierce sincerity in his eyes. "Caleb." He cupped her face gently, thumbs brushing away her tears. The moment stretched taut between them, full of everything they hadn't said, couldn't say. She saw the moment he made his decision, saw him lean toward her. "No," she whispered, but she didn't move away. "Tell me to stop," he said, his lips a breath from hers. She couldn't. Instead, she closed the distance between them. The kiss was gentle at first, almost hesitant, as if they were both afraid of breaking something fragile. Then Abigail made a soft sound in her throat, and Caleb's control snapped. He pulled her closer, one hand tangling in her hair, the other pressed against the small of her back. She clutched his shirt, holding on as the world spun away. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Caleb rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. "I'm sorry," he said roughly. "I shouldn't have—" "Don't," she interrupted. "Don't apologize. Not for that." He opened his eyes, and the raw hunger she saw there made her knees weak. "Abigail, I'm no good for you. I'm not the kind of man who—" This time she silenced him with her fingers against his lips. "I know what kind of man you are. Caleb Reed. You're the kind who works honest, who defends a woman's honor, who treats her with respect. That's all I need to know." He caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm that sent shivers through her. "You don't know everything." "Then tell me." But he shook his head, stepping back with visible effort. "Not yet, not until—" He ran a hand through his hair, clearly struggling. "Just give me time." That evening, dinner was a quiet affair, both of them caught up in their own thoughts. But the air between them had changed, charged now with acknowledged desire and unspoken promises. When their hands accidentally touched as she passed him the salt, they both jerked back as if burned. Later, as they sat by the fire, she attempting to read, he pretending to whittle, the tension became almost unbearable. "I should go," he said suddenly, standing. "Early start tomorrow." "Caleb." She stood too, setting aside her book. "What happened today? It doesn't have to change anything." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "It changes everything, and you know it." "Then let it," she said boldly, surprising them both. "I'm tired of being careful, of living half a life because of what people might say. Aren't you tired of running from whatever it is you're running from?" His face shuddered. "That's different." "Is it?" They stood facing each other across the small space, the fire crackling between them. Then Caleb moved, crossing to her in 2 quick strides. He cupped her face in his hands, studying her as if memorizing every detail. "You make me want things I can't have," he said roughly. "Make me believe in things I stopped believing in long ago. Then believe," she whispered. He kissed her again, harder this time, with a desperation that spoke of lonely nights and broken dreams. She met his passion with her own, all the longing of her isolated years pouring into this moment. When he lifted his head, they were both shaking. "Not like this," he said, though it clearly cost him to say it. "Not when there's so much you don't know. You deserve better than that." "What I deserve," she said, her voice unsteady, "is to make my own choices. And when you know the truth, when you know what I've done, where I've been, then I'll make that choice too." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, but not tonight. Tonight, I need to think, to figure out how to tell you." He trailed off, pressing one more kiss to her forehead before stepping away. "Good night, Abigail." She watched him go, her lips still tingling from his kisses, her heart racing with possibilities and fears. Through the window, she saw his tall figure disappear into the barn. saw the lantern flare to life in the loft, standing there in her empty house. She made a decision. Whatever Caleb's past held, whatever secrets he carried, she would face them. She'd lived in fear for too long, fear of judgment, fear of being alone, fear of feeling. He'd awakened something in her she'd thought dead, and she wouldn't let fear kill it again. Tomorrow, she would demand the truth. Tomorrow, she would make him see that whatever he was running from, he didn't have to face it alone. But tonight, she allowed herself to relive each moment of their kisses, to imagine what might come next. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, promising another storm. But for the first time in 3 years, Abigail didn't fear the darkness it would bring. She had faced down the Reverend, claimed her right to live as she chose, and kissed a man who made her feel alive again. Whatever storms were coming, from the sky or from Caleb's past, she would meet them head-on. She was done with merely surviving. It was time to start living again. The morning after their kiss, Caleb was gone. Abigail found his bedroll neatly folded in the barn loft. The tools he'd been using hung precisely in their places. For a moment, she stood frozen, her heart hammering against her ribs. Then she saw the note, tucked under the lantern where she couldn't miss it. Had to go to town, back by nightfall. See. She released a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. He hadn't run, not yet. The day stretched endlessly without him. She went through her chores mechanically, her mind replaying every moment of the night before. The Reverend's visit, Caleb's fierce defense of her, the kiss that had shattered her carefully constructed walls. Every time she thought of his hands on her face, his lips on hers, heat flooded through her, but beneath the warmth was fear. He'd promised to tell her the truth, and she sensed that truth would not be easy to hear. What kind of man arrived at a stranger's door shot and bleeding? What was he running from? And more importantly, who? As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, she heard the sound of hoofbeats. From the window, she watched Caleb ride in, his posture tense even from a distance. He'd been to town, yes, but something had happened there. She could read it in the set of his shoulders, the way he carefully scanned the horizon before dismounting. She met him at the barn, trying to keep her voice steady. "You were gone a long time." He looked at her then, and the pain in his eyes made her breath catch. "We need to talk." "All right." She wrapped her shawl tighter around herself, though the evening wasn't particularly cold. "Come inside. I'll make coffee." "No." He shook his head. "Not inside. Not—" He ran a hand through his hair. "Let's walk." They headed away from the buildings, toward the small rise that overlooked the eastern pasture. The dying light turned the grassland to gold, and a cool breeze carried the scent of sage. Neither spoke until they reached the top of the hill, where a lone cottonwood provided shelter. Caleb stood with his back to her, staring out at the vast emptiness. "My name is Caleb Reed. That much is true. What I didn't tell you is that there's a price on my head, $500, dead or alive." Abigail's knees weakened, but she forced herself to remain standing. "What did you do?" "I killed a man." He turned to face her then, his expression carved from stone. "Shot him in cold blood in front of a dozen witnesses. His name was Marcus Webb." "Why?" The word came out as barely more than a whisper. "Because he murdered my parents, burned them alive in their home while I was away on a cattle drive. Him and 2 others, Wallace Hendricks and a man I only know as Bishop." His hands clenched into fists. "I was 17, came home to ashes and bones. The sheriff said there was no proof, but everyone knew. Webb had wanted our land for years, and my father had refused to sell. So you—" Spent 3 years tracking them down. Found Hendricks first, in a saloon in Denver. He went for his gun when he saw me. Self-defense. They ruled it. Webb was smarter. Stayed in towns. Surrounded himself with people. Until one night in Amarillo, I found him alone. I called his name. Waited until he turned and saw who I was. Saw that he knew why I was there. Then I shot him. The brutality of it should have horrified her. Instead, she found herself thinking of Samuel, of all the times she'd wished him dead, of the relief she'd felt when they brought news of his killing. And Bishop? Still hunting him. Got word he might be in these parts, going by another name. That's what brought me to Wyoming. He met her eyes squarely. That's who I am. Abigail, a killer, a man driven by vengeance, not the kind of man who should be anywhere near a good woman like you. She was quiet for a long moment, processing this revelation. Have you killed anyone else? Anyone who didn't have a hand in your parents' murder? No. Though I've come close a few times. When men tried to collect the bounty, and when you find Bishop. What then? His face darkened. Then it's finished, one way or another. You mean you'll kill him or he'll kill you? Most likely. The simple acceptance in his voice made her angry. And that's all you want from life? Revenge and then death? It was. He took a step closer. Until I knocked on your door. Until you... He stopped, shaking his head. But that doesn't change what I am, what I've done. I should have told you from the start, but I was selfish. I wanted to pretend I could be the kind of man who deserved you. Stop. She closed the distance between them, placing her hand on his chest. Stop deciding what I deserve. That's my choice to make. Abigail? You asked if I think you're a killer. You want to know what I think? She looked up at him steadily. I think you're a man who lost everything and sought justice the only way you knew how. I think you're someone who's been carrying pain so long you've forgotten what it's like to live without it. And I think you're the first person in 3 years to make me feel like I'm more than the scandalous widow Whitlow. His hand covered hers where it rested on his chest. You don't know what you're saying. I'm wanted, any day. Bounty hunters could show up at your door because of me. The law didn't help your parents. The law didn't help me when Samuel was alive and... She stopped, biting her lip. And what? His voice gentled. What did he do to you? She'd never told anyone, had carried the shame of it locked inside, but standing here with Caleb, his own sins laid bare, she found the words spilling out. He hit me. Not often at first, and never where it would show. Said it was my fault for being willful, for not being the wife he deserved. The gambling debts, the drinking, the shady dealings. All my fault for not keeping him satisfied at home. Her voice grew stronger as she spoke. The night he died, he'd beaten me badly, accused me of looking at another man in town. I prayed that night not for his safety on the road to Cheyenne, but that he wouldn't come back. When they brought his body home, I had to bite my cheek to keep from smiling. Abigail. Caleb pulled her against him, his arms wrapping around her as if he could shield her from the memories. I'm sorry. I'm so damn sorry. So you see, she said against his chest, I understand about justice and the law not always being the same thing. I understand about carrying darkness inside you, and I understand about wanting something more than just revenge or survival. He pulled back to look at her face, one hand coming up to cup her cheek. What do you want? I want to live, she said simply. I want to wake up without fear. I want to work my land and see it prosper. She took a breath. I want you to stay. You know I can't promise that. When I get word of Bishop, then we'll face that when it comes. She turned her face into his palm, pressing a kiss there. But until then, why can't we have this? Why can't we have whatever time God grants us? He was silent for so long she thought he would refuse. Then, with a sound that might have been surrender, he lowered his head and kissed her. This kiss was different from the night before, deeper, more desperate, full of the knowledge of who they really were. Two damaged souls finding solace in each other. When they finally drew apart, the stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. All right, he said roughly, but we do this proper. I'll court you right, in front of the whole damn town if need be. Let 'em see that Caleb Reed knows how to treat a lady. Despite everything, she laughed. That might not be wise, given that you're wanted. I'm tired of running, tired of hiding. Besides, a ghost of a smile touched his lips. I've been going by my real name this whole time. If they haven't connected me to that wanted poster yet, chances are they won't. They walked back to the house slowly, hands linked, neither wanting to break the fragile peace they'd found. But as they neared the barn, Caleb suddenly tensed, pulling her behind him. "What is it?" "Horses passed through while we were gone. 3, maybe 4 riders." He knelt, examining the ground in the fading light. "Shod horses, riding fast. They circled the house." Fear crept up her spine. "Bounty hunters? Maybe. Or—" He stood, his face grim. "Or someone else. Pack a bag." "What?" "Just in case. Pack what you can't bear to lose and keep it ready. And from now on, you keep Samuel's rifle loaded and within reach." The peaceful moment shattered, replaced by the cold reality of their situation. She'd accepted his past, but now that past might be riding toward them with guns drawn. That night, Caleb didn't return to the barn. He sat in her kitchen, cleaning his weapons with methodical precision while she tried to focus on her mending. The domestic scene was underlaid with tension, both of them listening for sounds that didn't belong. "Tell me about Bishop," she said finally. "What does he look like?" "Last I knew, tall and thin, with a scar across his left cheek. But that was 6 years ago. Man could look like anything now. Could be anyone." He paused in his cleaning. "That's what makes him dangerous. Webb was brutal. Hendricks was mean, but Bishop's smart. He plans. He could be the mayor of a town or a traveling preacher or a store clerk. And you'd never know until it was too late." "You think he knows you're hunting him?" "Oh, he knows. Just like he knows that one day, one of us will kill the other." He looked up at her then. "Which is why, when I get word of where he is, I'll leave. No discussion. No goodbye if there isn't time. I won't bring that fight to your door." She wanted to protest, but the implacable look in his eyes stopped her. Instead, she asked, "And if you don't find him, if he's nowhere near here?" "Then I stay until spring. Help you get the ranch ready for summer. Maybe hire someone permanent to help you after I'm gone." "After I'm gone." The words sat heavy between them, a reminder that whatever they built together came with an expiration date. Later, as the night deepened and the moon rose full and bright, Caleb stood to leave. At the door, he turned back. "Abigail, what we talked about earlier, about you wanting to live, wanting more than just survival." "Yes?" He crossed to her in 2 strides, pulled her into his arms, and kissed her with a fierce tenderness that made her knees weak. "So do I," he said against her lips. "God help me, so do I." Then he was gone, heading to the barn but taking her heart with him. She stood in the doorway, watching his figure disappear into the shadows, and made a decision. Whatever came, bounty hunters, Bishop, or the judgment of the town, she would not let fear rule her anymore. She'd tasted what it was like to truly feel again, and she would fight to keep it as long as possible. Tomorrow, she would face whatever new challenges arose, but tonight, she touched her lips where he'd kissed her and allowed herself to hope that sometimes, even in a harsh land under an unforgiving sky, 2 broken people might find a way to build something whole. The days following Caleb's confession took on a strange duality, moments of unexpected sweetness punctuated by sharp edges of fear. They moved around each other with a new awareness, every glance loaded with meaning, every accidental touch sending sparks through the air. Yet beneath it all ran an undercurrent of vigilance, both of them watching the horizon for riders who might bring death. It was during this time that Abigail discovered what it meant to be courted by Caleb Reed. Despite the danger, or perhaps because of it, he seemed determined to give her what he thought she deserved, proper attention from a man who valued her. He brought her wildflowers every morning, left them on the porch step where she'd find them with her coffee. He insisted on helping with even the smallest chores, always maintaining a respectful distance, but somehow always there when she needed him. The townspeople noticed. Of course, their trips to town became exercises in stubborn defiance, Caleb escorting her with a proprietary air that dared anyone to comment. Some did, of course, but others began to nod grudgingly, seeing how he treated her, how the ranch prospered under their combined efforts. One afternoon, as Abigail worked in her garden, she heard approaching horses. Her blood chilled until she recognized the riders. Mrs. Emma Garrett from the neighboring ranch, accompanied by her daughter Sarah. Emma was one of the few women who'd never completely shunned Abigail, though their friendship had cooled after Samuel's death. "Abigail," Emma called out, dismounting with obvious reluctance. "We were passing by and thought to stop." It was a lie, and they all knew it. The Garrett Ranch was nowhere near the road to anywhere. This was a deliberate visit, and Abigail's heart raced, wondering at its purpose. "Emma, Sarah, would you like some tea?" They sat stiffly in her parlor. The conversation stilted until Emma finally broached her purpose. "There's talk in town about you and your hired man. Mr. Reed has been invaluable in maintaining the ranch," Abigail said carefully. "Yes, I'm sure." Emma set down her teacup with deliberate precision. "Abigail, we've known each other since you first came here as Samuel's bride. I remember how young you were, how hopeful. I also remember other things." Abigail's spine stiffened. Emma had once seen bruises on her arms, had asked careful questions that Abigail had deflected. They'd never spoken of it again. "What I'm saying," Emma continued, "is that you deserve happiness. Lord knows you've had little enough of it. But this man, there are rumors he's running from something, that he might be dangerous." "All men are dangerous in their way," Abigail replied. "Some hide it better than others." Emma studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Yes, I suppose that's true." She stood to leave, then paused at the door. "If you ever need anything, if trouble comes, send word. The Garrett Ranch remembers its friends." After they left, Abigail sat in her empty parlor, overwhelmed by the unexpected offer of support. When Caleb returned from checking the far pastures, he found her there, tears streaming down her face. "What happened?" He was beside her instantly, checking her for injury. "Are you hurt? Did someone? No?" She laughed through her tears. "No, nothing like that. Emma Garrett came by. She offered help if we need it. After all these years of isolation, I had forgotten what kindness looked like." He pulled her into his arms, holding her while she wept for all the lonely years. All the times she'd needed a friend and found only judgment. When her tears finally ceased, he tilted her face up to his. "You deserve every kindness," he said firmly. "Every happiness. Don't ever doubt that." The next few days passed peacefully, lulling them into a dangerous sense of security. They worked side by side during the day, shared quiet evenings by the fire. Caleb had taken to sleeping in the house, though he maintained strict propriety by bedding down in the main room. Still, knowing he was just beyond her bedroom door filled Abigail with a sense of safety she hadn't felt in years. It was a Tuesday afternoon when everything changed. Caleb had ridden to town for supplies, leaving Abigail to tend the garden. She was elbow-deep in soil when she heard horses approaching, multiple riders coming fast. She straightened, shading her eyes against the sun, and her blood ran cold. 4 men, armed and wearing the hard look of those who lived by violence. They spread out as they approached, a practiced maneuver that spoke of experience in cornering prey. "Afternoon, ma'am," the leader said, touching his hat with mocking courtesy. He was a heavy-set man with cold gray eyes and a scar that pulled his mouth into a permanent sneer. "We're looking for someone. Thought you might help us." "I don't know anything about—" "Now, don't be hasty," he interrupted. "We tracked him here fair and square. Caleb Reed. $500 bounty on his head. Word is he's been working this spread." Abigail forced herself to remain calm, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "I don't know anyone by that name." The man's smile widened. "That's so? Funny, because folks in town say different. Say he's been real cozy with the pretty widow woman. Now, you can make this easy and tell us where he is. Or—" He let the threat hang. "Or what?" Abigail lifted her chin. "You'll hurt an unarmed woman? I'm sure that'll make a fine story when you try to collect your blood money." Another rider, younger and meaner looking, spat tobacco juice near her feet. Bounty's the same whether we bring him in breathing or not. Same might go for those who harbor fugitives. That's enough, Jake, the leader said, but his eyes never left Abigail. We'll wait. Man's gotta come back sometime. And when he does, he patted his gun significantly. They dismounted, making themselves comfortable on her porch, their presence a violation of everything her home represented. Abigail stood frozen, her mind racing. Caleb would return soon, riding straight into an ambush. She had to warn him somehow. I need to tend my chickens, she said. Go ahead, the leader said. But don't think about running. My boys are real good shots. She walked to the chicken coop with measured steps, her mind working furiously. As she scattered feed, she carefully knocked over a water bucket, their agreed-upon signal for danger. If Caleb was approaching, if he saw it, time crawled by. The sun sank lower, painting long shadows across the yard. The bounty hunters grew restless, their leader checking his pocket watch repeatedly. Then she saw him, just a speck on the horizon, but unmistakably Caleb returning. Her heart sank as he continued approaching, seemingly unaware of the danger. But as he drew closer, she noticed something different about his posture, a tension that hadn't been there before. The bounty hunters noticed him too, standing and spreading out with practiced efficiency. That him? The leader asked. Abigail said nothing, but her silence was answer enough. Caleb Reed, the leader called out when Caleb was within earshot. We know who you are. Come peaceful-like, and this doesn't have to get ugly. Caleb reined in his horse about 50 yards out, his hands visible but near his weapons. Afternoon. Gentlemen, seems you have me at a disadvantage. Name's Murdoch. These are my associates. We're here to collect the bounty on your head. Reed. Nothing personal. Everything's personal when it comes to dying. Caleb replied. His eyes found Abigail briefly, and she saw him take in her position. The men's placement, calculating odds. Let Mrs. Whitlow go inside. This is between us. She stays, Murdoch said. Insurance, you might say. That was their mistake. Abigail saw the change in Caleb's posture, the cold fury that descended over his features. You want to threaten a woman? Then it is personal. What happened next occurred so fast Abigail could barely follow it. Caleb drew and fired in one smooth motion, his first shot taking Jake in the shoulder, spinning him around. He rolled from his horse as the others opened fire. Using the animal as cover, Murdoch grabbed Abigail, pulling her in front of him as a shield. Drop the gun! Reed! Or she dies! Caleb rose from behind his horse, gun steady despite the chaos. You already made that mistake. Murdoch, you threatened her. That means you die today, one way or another. Big talk for a man outnumbered. Numbers don't matter when you're fighting for something, Caleb said. His eyes met Abigail's. When you're fighting for someone. In that moment, Abigail understood. He wasn't just fighting for his life. He was fighting for their future, for the possibility of happiness they'd only just begun to explore. And she wouldn't be a passive victim in this story. Murdoch's grip had loosened slightly, his attention focused on Caleb. Abigail suddenly went limp, dropping her full weight downward. Surprised, Murdoch stumbled, his gun swinging wide. It was all the opening Caleb needed. His shot caught Murdoch in the chest, sending him tumbling backward. The remaining two bounty hunters, seeing their leader fall, made a choice. One threw down his gun, hands raised. The other tried to run, but Caleb's voice stopped him cold. You run, you die. You stay and ride out peaceful. You live. Choose. The man stopped, then slowly raised his hands. Caleb kept his gun trained on them as he moved to Abigail, helping her to her feet. You hurt? No, she managed, though her legs shook. I'm all right. Get their guns, he told her, never taking his eyes off the men. She did as instructed, gathering the weapons with trembling hands. Now, Caleb addressed the survivors. You're going to get on your horses and ride? You're going to forget you ever heard my name or saw this place, because if I see you again, If I hear you've been talking about Mrs. Whitlow, I'll hunt you down and finish what we started here." "Understood?" They nodded frantically, helping their wounded companion onto his horse. As they prepared to leave, the one who'd surrendered first looked back. "Reed? For what it's worth, Murdoch had it coming. Man who threatens women folk ain't no man at all." After they'd gone, taking Murdoch's body with them, Caleb finally lowered his gun. The strength seemed to drain from him, and he sat down hard on the porch steps. Abigail sank down beside him, and for a long moment, they simply sat in silence, processing what had happened. "They'll be back," she said finally. "Others will come." "Yes." He turned to her, his face etched with pain and resignation. "I have to leave. Abigail, tonight, I brought danger to your door. Exactly what I swore I wouldn't do." "No." The word came out fiercer than she'd intended. "No. You don't get to make that choice for me. Not anymore. Abigail, I knew what you were when I asked you to stay. I knew the risks." She took his face in her hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. "Do you think today changes anything? Do you think I care more about my safety than about losing you?" "You should," he said roughly. "God, woman, you should." "But I don't." She leaned her forehead against his. "I'm tired of being afraid. Caleb, I've been afraid my whole adult life, afraid of Samuel, afraid of the town's judgment, afraid of being alone. I won't be afraid of loving you too." He made a sound that might have been a sob, then kissed her with desperate intensity. When they broke apart, both were shaking. "We can't stay here," he said. "Not after this. Word will spread. More will come. Then we leave." She said simply, "Together. You'd give up your home? Your land?" "This hasn't been a home since the day I became a widow. Maybe before that. It's just a place where I've been marking time, waiting for life to begin again." She touched his face gently. "You're my home now. Where you go, I go." They spent the night preparing, packing what they could carry, securing what they'd leave behind. Emma Garrett would look after the ranch, maybe buy it if Abigail didn't return. It was a hard choice, but a clear one. As dawn broke, they loaded the wagon with their few precious possessions. Abigail took one last look at the homestead where she'd spent so many lonely years, then climbed up beside Caleb. "Regrets?" he asked. "None," she said firmly. "Only hope." As they drove away, the rising sun painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Behind them lay a life of isolation and fear. Ahead waited uncertainty, danger, and the continued hunt for Bishop, but also possibility, also love. "There's something I need to tell you," Caleb said as the homestead disappeared behind them. "Something I should have said before." "What's that?" He took her hand, bringing it to his lips. "I love you, Abigail Whitlow. Whatever comes next, whatever we face, I want you to know that. You brought me back to life when I thought I was only living for death." Tears spilled down her cheeks, but they were tears of joy. "I love you too, Caleb Reed. Now stop talking and drive. We have a life to build." He smiled then, the first truly unguarded smile she'd seen from him, and snapped the reins. The horses picked up their pace, carrying them toward whatever destiny awaited. Together, they would face it. Together, they were finally, truly alive. They had been traveling for 3 days, staying off the main roads and sleeping under the stars, when Caleb finally told her where they were headed, the town of Silver Ridge. He said, where a man matching Bishop's description had been seen working as a grain merchant under the name Thomas Aldrich. "How can you be sure it's him?" Abigail asked as they made camp by a small stream. "I can't, but my source is reliable. A Pinkerton man who owed me a favor. Says this Aldrich arrived 2 years ago with money but no history. Fits Bishop's description. And has the same peculiar way of holding his cigarette between his third and fourth fingers." It was such a small detail, yet Abigail could see how it had lodged in Caleb's memory like a splinter, one of 1,000 tiny observations that kept his parents' killer alive in his mind. That night, as they lay on separate bedrolls with all the propriety of unmarried travelers, she asked him, What happens after? After you find Bishop? He was quiet so long she thought he'd fallen asleep. Then, I used to think there wouldn't be an after, that either he'd kill me or I'd kill him and hang for it. Never planned beyond that moment. And now I have you. His voice was soft in the darkness. Now I want there to be an after. But wanting doesn't make it possible. They reached Silver Ridge on a Thursday afternoon, the town bustling with commerce from the nearby silver mines. It was larger than Benthorn, more prosperous, the kind of place where a man could reinvent himself if he had money and the right manner. They took rooms at a respectable boarding house, separate rooms, though the knowing look the proprietress gave them suggested she wasn't fooled by their claim to be siblings. Caleb's plan was simple: confirm Aldrich's identity before making any move. For 2 days, they watched and waited. Abigail played the part of a widow looking to purchase grain for a fictional ranch, giving her reason to visit Aldrich's establishment. The first time she saw him, her blood chilled. He was tall and thin as Caleb had described, well-dressed in the manner of a successful merchant. The scar on his left cheek had faded but was still visible, a pale line through his carefully groomed whiskers. But it was his eyes that convinced her, cold and calculating, the eyes of a man who'd learned to hide his true nature behind a veneer of respectability. "It's him," she told Caleb that evening. "I'm certain of it." "How can you be sure?" "The way he looked at me when I mentioned I was recently widowed. Like he was calculating my worth, my vulnerability. I've seen that look before." She didn't need to say Samuel's name. Caleb understood. "I won't let him hurt you," Caleb said fiercely. "I know." She took his hand. "But we need to be smart about this. He's established here, respected. You can't just call him out in the street." Over the next days, they learned more about Thomas Aldrich. He was indeed respected, even serving on the town council. He'd donated to the church building fund and was courting the banker's daughter. He'd built himself a perfect life on the ashes of the one he'd destroyed. It was torture for Caleb, being so close to his quarry yet unable to act. Abigail watched him grow more tense with each passing day, his control fraying at the edges. At night, he paced their boarding house like a caged animal. 6 years, he said one evening, standing at the window watching Aldrich's house. 6 years I've hunted him, and now he's right there, living comfortable while my parents are dust. Caleb. She moved behind him, placing her hands on his shoulders. "Justice will come. We just need the right moment." He turned to her then, and the raw pain in his eyes made her heart ache. "What if there is no justice? What if he just goes on living his false life while I waste away watching?" "Then we leave," she said simply. "We go somewhere new and build our own life. Your parents wouldn't want you to die for vengeance. You didn't know them." "No, but I know you, and the goodness in you didn't come from nowhere." He pulled her close then, holding her as if she were the only thing keeping him anchored to sanity. They stood that way for a long time, drawing strength from each other. The moment Caleb had been waiting for came unexpectedly. Abigail had returned to Aldrich's store, ostensibly to finalize a grain purchase. She was examining ledgers when she heard Aldrich dismiss his clerk for the day. Warning prickled along her spine. "Now then, Mrs. Whitlow," Aldrich said, moving closer than propriety allowed. "Perhaps we could discuss a more personal arrangement. A widow alone needs protection, guidance. I could provide both." "That's kind of you, Mr. Aldrich, but unnecessary." She tried to step back, but he caught her arm. "Come now, don't be coy. I've seen how you look at me. You're mistaken. Women like you need a firm hand." His grip tightened painfully. "Your late husband clearly didn't provide proper discipline." The shop door burst open with such force it slammed against the wall. Caleb stood there, his face a mask of cold fury. "Take your hand off her, Bishop." Aldrich, Bishop, went very still. His grip on Abigail loosened, and she pulled free, moving quickly to Caleb's side. "I don't know what you're talking about," Bishop said, but his eyes had gone flat and dangerous. "My name is Thomas Aldrich." Your name is Marcus Bishop, and you murdered James and Mary Reed 6 years ago. Burned them alive in their home." Caleb's voice was steady as stone. "Their son has come calling." Recognition flickered across Bishop's face, followed by a smile that made Abigail's skin crawl. "Young Caleb, I wondered if you'd ever find me. Your father spoke of you before he died, cried out for his boy." The lie was calculated to hurt, and Abigail saw it hit its mark. Caleb's hand moved toward his gun, but she caught his arm. "Not like this," she whispered. "Not in cold blood. You're better than that." "Am I?" Caleb's voice was rough with pain. "I know you are." Bishop laughed, the sound like breaking glass. "Listen to your woman, boy. Shoot me here and you'll hang for certain. I'm a respected citizen. You're nothing but a wanted killer." "Then face me fair," Caleb said. "Tomorrow at dawn, outside town. End this like men." "A duel." Bishop's eyebrows rose. "How delightfully antiquated. And if I refuse, then I'll tell this whole town who you really are. Every detail of what you did. Let them decide if Thomas Aldrich is the man they think he is." Bishop's eyes narrowed, calculating odds. "You have no proof. I have names, dates. The banker in Pueblo you killed before coming here? Yes, I know about him too. The family in Kansas. Your trail of bodies is long. Bishop, want me to keep talking?" For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Bishop's face, his carefully constructed life balanced on a knife's edge, and they all knew it. "Dawn," he said finally. "The old mine road. Come alone." "He'll come," Abigail said, surprising them both. "But not alone. I'll be there as witness. Women have no place. I have every place." She interrupted. "I won't let him face you without someone to watch his back. Unless you plan to bring friends." Bishop's smile was sharp. "Just my gun, Mrs. Whitlow. Though I wonder, when young Caleb falls, will you warm my bed as readily as you've warmed his?" Caleb lunged, but Abigail held him back with surprising strength. "Save it for dawn," she said coldly. To Bishop, "You'll die tomorrow never knowing a woman's willing touch. That seems fitting for a man like you." They left the store, Caleb vibrating with barely controlled rage. Back at the boarding house, he paced their room like a storm constrained by walls. "I should have killed him there," he said. "Should have ended it. And hung for murder, let him win even in death?" Abigail caught his hands, stilling him. "This way's better. Fair. Final. What if he doesn't come? What if he runs? Then we hunt him again, but he won't run. His pride won't let him." She touched his face. "You gave him a choice. That's more than he gave your parents." That night, they held each other fully clothed on his narrow bed, propriety abandoned in the face of what dawn might bring. Caleb traced her face with gentle fingers as if memorizing every line. "If something happens, nothing will happen," she said firmly. "But if it does, promise me you'll leave immediately. Take the money in my saddlebags and go somewhere safe. Start fresh. Caleb, promise me." She kissed him instead of answering, pouring all her love and faith into the contact. When they finally drew apart, she said, "You'll face him, and you'll win, and then we'll leave together. That's the only promise I'll make." He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. "I love you. I love you too, and tomorrow, when this is over, we'll have the rest of our lives to prove it." They lay awake through the long hours, talking quietly of dreams they'd never dared voice before, of a small ranch somewhere peaceful, of children with his dark eyes and her stubborn spirit, of growing old together on a porch, watching sunsets without fear. As the first pale light of dawn crept through the window, Caleb rose and dressed with steady hands. Abigail did the same, ignoring his protests that she should stay behind. "Where you go, I go," she said simply. "Always." They rode out together toward the old mine road, toward a reckoning 6 years in the making. The morning was cool and clear, the sky painted in shades of pearl and gold. Birds sang in the mesquite bushes. Indifferent to human drama, Bishop was already there, standing beside his horse with the patience of a man who'd waited for many such appointments. He'd dressed well for the occasion, black coat, string tie, the picture of a respectable merchant save for the gun at his hip. "Right on time," he said as they approached, "though I'd hoped you'd reconsider the woman's presence." "She stays," Caleb said, dismounting with fluid grace. "Someone should witness your end. Or yours." Bishop moved away from his horse, taking position in the road. "Shall we dispense with formalities? I have a business to run. After you murdered my parents, did you even pause? Did you think of them at all?" Bishop shrugged. "They were obstacles. I removed them. Nothing personal. Everything's personal when it comes to family." They faced each other across 20 paces of dusty road, hands hovering near their guns. Abigail held her breath, her own hand near Samuel's rifle in her saddle scabbard. "On 3, Bishop suggested with mocking courtesy. "Count it," Caleb said. 1. The morning held its breath. 2. Bishop's hand twitched slightly, telegraphing his intent. 3. Both men drew, the movements almost too fast to follow. 2 shots cracked across the morning air, echoing off the distant hills. For a heartbeat, both stood frozen. Then Bishop looked down at the spreading red stain on his white shirt, surprise replacing arrogance on his face. "Impossible," he whispered. "I'm faster. I've always been faster." "You were faster than a grieving boy," Caleb said. His gun still trained on Bishop as the man sank to his knees. "But that boy spent 6 years becoming something else, someone who could face you and win." Bishop fell forward, his blood soaking into the dusty ground. With his last breath, he managed, "Your father begged." "No," Caleb said quietly. "He didn't. My father never begged for anything in his life. But you did just now, in your way, begging me to believe your lies, to carry them with me. I won't." Bishop's eyes went blank, staring at nothing. It was over. Caleb stood for a long moment, looking down at the man who'd haunted his dreams for 6 years. Then he turned to Abigail, and she saw something in his face she'd never seen before. Peace. "It's done," he said simply. She dismounted and went to him, wrapping her arms around him as the gun fell from his nerveless fingers. "Yes, it's done." They stood there as the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the road. Finally, Caleb pulled back, cupping her face in his hands. "Marry me," he said. "Right now, today. I don't want to waste another minute of the life we've fought so hard to have." "Yes," she said, laughing through sudden tears. "Yes, of course, yes." They left Bishop's body where it lay. Someone would find it soon enough, and rode back to town. By noon, they stood before a justice of the peace, exchanging vows with the boarding house proprietress and her husband as witnesses. By evening, they were miles away, heading south toward New Mexico and a fresh start. As they made camp that first night as husband and wife, Caleb pulled her close under the vast canopy of stars. "No more running," he said. "No more ghosts. Just us and whatever comes next." "Just us," she agreed, sealing the promise with a kiss that tasted of freedom and forever. The past was buried on a dusty road outside Silver Ridge. The future stretched ahead, bright with possibility. And in that moment, under the eternal stars, 2 souls who'd found each other in darkness finally stepped fully into the light. The news of Thomas Aldrich's death spread through Silver Ridge like wildfire. By the time the sun reached its zenith, the town was buzzing with speculation and shock. The respected merchant, found dead on the old mine road, shot through the heart in what appeared to be a duel. Sheriff William Hartley stood over the body, his weathered face grim as he surveyed the scene. "Anyone see what happened?" he asked the gathered crowd. "I heard shots at dawn," offered Jake Martinez, who ran the livery stable. "Thought it was hunters." The sheriff's investigation led him inevitably to the boarding house, where Mrs. Pemberton nervously admitted that yes, a couple calling themselves the Reeds had been staying there, brother and sister, they'd claimed, though she'd had her doubts about that particular story. "They left this morning," she said, wringing her hands. "Right after, Well, they seemed in a powerful hurry, but Sheriff, they were such nice folks. Quiet, respectable, paid in advance. Meanwhile, miles away, Caleb and Abigail rode hard through the day, putting distance between themselves and Silver Ridge. They'd planned for this possibility, knowing that even a fair duel might bring consequences. As the sun began to sink, they finally slowed their pace, finding shelter in a grove of cottonwoods near a small stream. "We should be far enough now," Caleb said, helping Abigail down from her horse. She moved stiffly, unaccustomed to such hard riding. "Will they follow?" "Maybe. Depends on what they find when they dig into Aldrich's past." He pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I'm sorry. This isn't how I wanted our married life to begin." "I'm not sorry," she said firmly. "We're free, Caleb. Both of us. That's worth any amount of riding." They made a simple camp, and for the first time since leaving Benthorn, they allowed themselves to truly rest. As night fell, they lay together under the stars. Finally and fully, husband and wife in every sense. The tenderness between them was overwhelming, years of pain and loneliness falling away in each other's arms. Back in Silver Ridge, Sheriff Hartley sat in his office, reading through the papers found in Thomas Aldrich's safe. His deputy, a young man named Tom Carson, watched nervously as the sheriff's face grew increasingly dark. "What is it, Sheriff?" "Seems our respectable Mr. Aldrich wasn't who he claimed to be." Hartley held up a document. "Unless Thomas Aldrich was in two places at once, dying in Pueblo 3 years ago while also setting up shop here." More revelations followed. Letters hinting at past crimes, carefully hidden but not destroyed. The arrogance of a man who thought himself untouchable. References to the Reed family in Colorado, to a fire, to other deaths across the territories. "Good Lord," Carson breathed. "He was a killer?" "Appears so. And it appears someone finally caught up with him." The sheriff leaned back in his chair. "Question is, do we chase after a man who did our town a favor? Or do we let sleeping dogs lie?" It was then that a delegation of townspeople arrived, led by banker Charles Morrison and several other prominent citizens. They'd been doing their own investigating, spurred by the sheriff's discoveries. "William," Morrison began, "we've been discussing the situation, about Aldrich, or Bishop, or whoever he really was. And the man was courting my daughter." Morrison's voice was tight with suppressed rage. "If this Reed fellow hadn't stopped him..." "We feel," another man interjected, "that perhaps justice has already been served. No need to pursue the matter further." The sheriff studied them all, then nodded slowly. "Might be you're right. Might be that Thomas Aldrich died of misadventure. No witnesses, no proof of anything else. Case closed." 3 days later, Caleb and Abigail reached the New Mexico territory. They'd traded their exhausted horses for fresh ones at a small trading post, where no one asked questions if you paid in cash. The landscape here was different. Red rock and sage, mountains rising in the distance like ancient sentinels. "It's beautiful," Abigail breathed, taking in the vast expanse. "Harsh country," Caleb warned, "but good for those who want to be left alone." They found what they were looking for in the shadow of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, a small abandoned homestead with good water and decent soil. The previous owners had given up, defeated by isolation and hardship. But Caleb and Abigail saw possibility. "We'll have to work hard," Caleb said, surveying the dilapidated buildings. "When have we ever done otherwise?" Abigail replied, already planning where she'd plant her garden. They set to work with a will, repairing the cabin, clearing land, building fences. The work was hard but satisfying, made sweeter by doing it together. At night, exhausted but content, they'd sit on their rough-hewn porch and watch the stars emerge in the vast New Mexico sky. It was during this time that Abigail first suspected she might be with child. The realization came with a mix of joy and fear, joy at the possibility of new life, fear of bringing a child into their still uncertain world. "Caleb," she said one evening as they shared their simple supper, "I have something to tell you." He looked up from his plate. immediately alert to her serious tone. "What is it?" I believe I'm going to have a baby." The expression that crossed his face was worth any amount of uncertainty. Wonder, joy, and a touching vulnerability transformed his weathered features. "A baby?" he repeated, as if the word was foreign. "Our baby. Well, I certainly hope it's ours," she said with a shaky laugh. He was around the table in an instant, pulling her into his arms with infinite gentleness. "Abigail, I never dared hope." "I know," she whispered against his chest. "Neither did I." The months that followed were a time of building, not just their homestead, but their life together. Caleb proved as tender with his pregnant wife as he was capable with his hands, anticipating her needs before she voiced them. He carved a cradle with patient skill during the long winter evenings, while Abigail sewed tiny clothes by lamplight. Spring came with unexpected visitors. A small wagon train, lost and low on supplies, stumbled upon their homestead. Instead of turning them away, Caleb and Abigail offered what help they could: water, directions, a meal for the children. "You're mighty trusting," the wagon master, a grizzled man named Patterson, observed. "Most folks out here would have met us with a shotgun." "We've learned that kindness comes back to you," Abigail said, one hand resting on her now prominent belly. "Besides, we were strangers in need once ourselves." Among the travelers was a young couple, James and Martha Brennan, barely out of their teens and clearly overwhelmed by the journey. When Martha saw Abigail's condition, her face lit with desperate hope. "Please, ma'am," she said privately to Abigail. I'm in the same way, and I'm so frightened. I don't know anything about birthing babies out here." Abigail's heart went out to the girl. "Stay," she said impulsively. "You and your husband? There's land enough here for 2 families, and we could use the help." It was a decision that would shape their future in ways they couldn't imagine. The Brennans proved to be hard workers and good neighbors, and by summer, a small community had begun to form around the 2 homesteads. Abigail gave birth on a hot July night, with Martha and a traveling midwife in attendance. Caleb paced outside like a caged wolf, flinching at every sound from within. When at last a baby's cry pierced the night, he nearly collapsed with relief. "You have a son," the midwife announced, placing the squalling infant in Abigail's arms. "Healthy and loud as a rooster." They named him James Samuel Reed, James for Caleb's father, Samuel because even painful histories deserved remembrance. As Caleb held his son for the first time, tears streamed down his face. "He's perfect," he whispered. "How is it possible for something so perfect to exist?" "Love makes all things possible," Abigail replied, watching her husband cradle their child with infinite tenderness. As young James grew, so did their small settlement. Other families arrived, drawn by tales of good land and fair neighbors. A small school was built, then a general store. Caleb found himself elected as unofficial mayor, a position he accepted reluctantly but fulfilled conscientiously. One day, nearly 2 years after their arrival, a lone rider approached the homestead. Caleb, working in the field, tensed at the sight of the star on the man's chest. But the lawman raised his hand in peaceful greeting. "Mr. Reed? I'm Marshal Frank Warren. I'm not here for trouble." "Then why are you here?" Caleb asked, not lowering his guard. Warren dismounted slowly, keeping his hands visible. "Wanted to meet the man who rid the world of Marcus Bishop. Been tracking that bastard, pardon my language, for 5 years. Always a step behind." "I don't know what you're talking about." Warren smiled. "Course not. But if you did know, I'd want to shake that man's hand and tell him the federal marshals are grateful. Bishop killed a judge's son in Kansas, among others. There were those who wanted him taken alive for trial, but dead works just as well for me." He extended his hand, and after a moment, Caleb shook it. "Hypothetically speaking," Warren continued, "if I knew such a man, I'd tell him his slate's clean as far as the law's concerned. That bounty on Reed? Called off. Seems the witnesses against him have reconsidered their testimony. Man's free to live his life in peace. I'll be sure to pass that along if I meet him," Caleb said carefully. Warren mounted his horse, then paused. "Nice place you got here. Good land for raising a family. You take care now." After he'd gone, Abigail emerged from the house where she'd been listening, baby James on her hip. "It's over," she said softly. "Really, truly over." "Seems so." Caleb pulled them both close. His family, his world. "What do you think? Can a man like me really just live? Be a husband, a father, a neighbor?" "You already are," she said, reaching up to touch his face. "You have been since the day you decided to stay." That evening, as they sat on their porch watching James toddle after fireflies, Caleb told their son a story, not about gunfights or vengeance, but about two people who found each other in the darkness and chose to walk into the light together, about building something good from the ashes of pain, about the courage it takes to trust in love and the strength found in forgiveness of others and oneself. "And they lived happily ever after?" Abigail prompted when he paused. "No," Caleb said, pulling her close. "They lived truthfully ever after. They had sorrows and joys, hardships and triumphs, but they faced them all together, and that made all the difference." As the stars emerged in the vast New Mexico sky, the Reed family sat in peaceful silence. The past was done. Its ghosts lay to rest. The future stretched ahead, uncertain as always, but no longer fearsome. They had each other. They had their land. They had their community. They had built a life worth living from the ashes of lives worth leaving behind. And in the end, that was the greatest justice of all, not the settling of old scores, but the creation of something new and good and lasting. Love had conquered vengeance. Hope had defeated despair, and two broken souls had found wholeness in each other's arms. The circle was complete. The story, at last, was done, and the living, the real living, could finally begin. 1 year had passed since Marshal Warren's visit, and the small settlement in the shadow of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains had grown into a proper community. They called it Haven Valley, a name suggested by Martha Brennan and embraced by all for its simple truth. This was indeed a haven for those seeking peace and a fresh start. The Reed homestead had prospered beyond their wildest dreams. The harsh New Mexico land had yielded to their patient work, producing crops that sustained not just their family, but contributed to the growing community's needs. Caleb had discovered an unexpected talent for horse breeding, and their corral now held some of the finest animals in the territory. On this particular morning, Abigail stood in her flourishing garden, watching 3-year-old James chase butterflies with the determination of his father and the joy that was entirely his own. Her hand rested on her belly where their second child grew, a surprise blessing that had brought tears of happiness to Caleb's eyes when she'd told him. "Mama, look!" James called, pointing at a particularly colorful butterfly that had landed on the sunflowers. "Pretty. Very pretty, my love," she agreed, moving to join him. The morning sun caught the silver threads that had begun to appear in her auburn hair, not from hardship now, but from years of working under the New Mexico sun, years of laughter and love. From the barn, she could hear Caleb working with the Brennan's oldest boy, teaching him how to gentle a young colt. His patient voice carried on the wind, so different from the hard-edged man who had collapsed on her doorstep all those years ago. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. There were still nights when old nightmares visited, mornings when she'd find him staring at the horizon as if waiting for ghosts to appear. But those moments grew rarer with each passing season. "Mrs. Reed," a voice called from the road. She turned to see Sarah Patterson, the shopkeeper's daughter, riding up on her bay mare. At 17, Sarah had become like a younger sister to Abigail, often helping with James when the community work grew demanding. "Good morning, Sarah. What brings you out so early?" Sarah dismounted, her face bright with excitement. "Papa wanted me to tell you there's a traveling preacher coming through next week. A real one, not like that snake oil fellow last spring. Thought you might want to know, seeing as how you and Mr. Reed never had a proper church wedding. Abigail smiled at the girl's enthusiasm. Their quick ceremony before the justice of the peace had served its purpose, but she knew Caleb sometimes wished they'd had something more formal, more celebratory. "I'll speak with Caleb about it," she promised. "Would you like some fresh bread? I baked this morning." As Sarah helped herself in the kitchen, Abigail watched Caleb emerge from the barn with young Tom Brennan. The boy was beaming, clearly proud of whatever he'd accomplished. Caleb ruffled his hair affectionately before sending him home, then noticed Abigail watching. The smile he gave her still had the power to make her heart skip after all these years. "You're going to spoil that boy," she called out as he approached. "He reminds me of myself at that age," Caleb replied, wrapping his arms around her from behind, careful of her expanding middle. All energy and dreams, no sense of caution. "You? Lacking caution? I can't imagine." She leaned back into his embrace, feeling the solid warmth of him. "Sarah brought news. There's a preacher coming through next week." She felt him tense slightly, then relax. And I thought, perhaps we might want to renew our vows, have the ceremony we couldn't have before." He was quiet for a moment, then turned her in his arms to face him. "You'd want that? After everything? Especially after everything," she said firmly. "I want to stand before God and our community and declare what's in my heart. I want our children to know their parents chose each other not in desperation or fear, but in love and hope." "Abigail Reed," he murmured, cupping her face with work-roughened hands that were infinitely gentle with her. "How did I get so lucky?" "It wasn't luck," she reminded him. "It was a choice. We chose each other. We chose this life, and we keep choosing it every day." The week that followed was filled with preparations. The entire community threw itself into the planning with enthusiasm that touched both Caleb and Abigail deeply. The women made her a new dress from fabric that had been carefully hoarded for special occasions. The men built an arbor of local pine and juniper that filled the air with its sweet scent. Even the children contributed, gathering wildflowers and practicing songs for the ceremony. The night before the wedding, Caleb found himself unable to sleep. He walked out onto the porch, looking up at the star-filled sky that had become as familiar as his own heartbeat. The Big Dipper pointed north, just as it had during all those nights he'd spent hunting Bishop, consumed by vengeance and darkness. "Can't sleep either," Abigail's voice came from behind him. She joined him on the porch, wrapped in the quilt her mother had made years ago, one of the few things she'd brought from her old life. "Thinking," he admitted, "about how different life is from what I expected." "Disappointed?" "No." He pulled her close. "Grateful, amazed. Sometimes I wake up and can't believe this is real. You, James, the baby coming. This place, I spent so many years focused on death that I forgot life was even possible." "You didn't forget," she corrected gently. "You just needed someone to remind you." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching clouds drift across the moon. From the Brennan homestead, they could hear the faint cry of a baby. Martha had given birth to a daughter just last month. The sound of new life in what had once been empty land seemed to encapsulate everything they'd built. The wedding day dawned clear and bright, the October air crisp with the promise of winter. The ceremony was held in the meadow behind the schoolhouse, with the mountains standing witness in the distance. It seemed the entire population of Haven Valley had turned out, filling the rough wooden benches the men had constructed. Abigail wore her new dress, simple blue cotton with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. But it was the expression on her face that took everyone's breath away. She glowed with a joy that transformed her from merely pretty to radiantly beautiful. James walked before her, carrying a basket of flower petals that he threw with great enthusiasm, if not much accuracy. Caleb waited at the arbor in his best shirt and a new vest the women had surprised him with. His eyes never left Abigail as she approached, and more than one person noticed him discreetly wipe away tears. The preacher, Reverend Thomas, was a young man with kind eyes and an easy manner. He spoke of love not as a feeling, but as a choice made daily. of marriage as two people choosing to face the world's hardships together rather than alone. When it came time for the vows, Caleb spoke first, his voice steady and clear. "Abigail, you found me bleeding and broken, and you chose to heal rather than turn away. You saw past the darkness I carried to something worth saving. You gave me a reason to stop running, to stop hating, to start living. I promise to spend every day earning the gift of your love, protecting the life we've built, and teaching our children that redemption is always possible." Abigail's voice was thick with emotion as she responded, "Caleb, you showed me that strength could be gentle, that protection could come without control, that love could exist without pain. You helped me find my voice when the world wanted me silent. I promise to stand beside you through whatever comes, to be your peace when old ghosts visit, and to never let you forget that you are worthy of every happiness we've found." When Reverend Thomas pronounced them husband and wife, again, and told Caleb he could kiss his bride, the cheer that went up could probably be heard in Santa Fe. The celebration that followed was unlike anything Haven Valley had seen. Tables groaned under the weight of everyone's contributions. Marcus Hoffman played his fiddle while couples danced on the packed earth. Children ran between the adults' legs, their laughter bright as birdsong. Even baby James, tired from his flower-bearing duties, perked up for cake. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Abigail found herself standing apart for a moment, taking it all in. Emma Garrett would have been proud to see this. The woman who had first shown Abigail kindness back in Bent Horn had passed the previous winter, but her spirit of compassion lived on in this community. "No regrets?" Caleb asked, joining her with James sleepy in his arms. "None," she said firmly. "Not one. Even the hard times, the danger, the running, the fear. Especially those, they brought us here." She gestured to the scene before them, their friends, their neighbors, their chosen family. "They brought us home." As the stars began to appear, the newlyweds made their rounds, thanking everyone for coming, for their help, for becoming the family neither of them had thought they'd have again. The Brennans, who'd become like siblings, old Pete Morrison, who'd taught Caleb about the local weather patterns. The Martinez family, whose children played with James daily. Each face represented a thread in the tapestry of their new life. Finally, as the celebration wound down and families began heading home, Caleb and Abigail walked back to their house hand in hand. James was already asleep in his father's arms, worn out from the excitement. The house that had once been abandoned now glowed with lamplight, welcoming them home. "So, Mrs. Reed," Caleb said as they climbed the porch steps, "what shall we do with our second wedding night?" "First," she said practically, "we put our son to bed. Then we sit on our porch and watch the stars come out. And then—" She gave him a look that made him grin like the young man he'd never gotten to be. "Then we'd practice making more children for this big house of ours." He laughed, the sound rich and free. "Have I mentioned lately that I love you?" "Not in the last hour," she teased. "Then I'm overdue. I love you. Abigail Reed. Today, tomorrow, and all the days after. And I love you. Caleb Reed. In this life and whatever comes after." They went inside together, their shadows dancing on the wall from the lamplight. Through the window, the mountains stood eternal guard while the stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to human joy and sorrow alike. But in this house, in this valley, in this life built from ashes and determination, love had created its own universe, one where broken people could become whole, where the past could be forgiven if not forgotten, and where the future stretched bright with possibility. As Caleb had once told their son, they didn't live happily ever after in the fairy tale sense. They lived truly, deeply, authentically. They faced droughts and floods, sickness and health, the arrival of 3 more children and the challenges of raising them in a still wild land. But they faced it all together, and that made all the difference. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the work was done and the children were asleep, they would sit on their porch and remember the wounded stranger at the door, the widow who chose compassion over safety. The long road that had brought them to this place, they would hold hands and know that every choice, every risk, every moment of faith had been worth it. For in choosing each other, they had chosen life itself, and life, with all its complexities and contradictions, its sorrows and joys, had chosen them right back. In the end, that was the greatest gift of all, not just to survive, but to thrive, not just to exist, but to love. And in the heart of the New Mexico wilderness, two souls who had once known only darkness had built themselves a kingdom of light. The circle of their story was complete, but the echoes of their love would ripple outward through generations, in the children they raised, in the community they helped build, in the proof they offered that redemption was always possible for those brave enough to reach for it. And so they lived, fully and freely, until their days were done. Together, always together, in the haven they had made. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the Wild West, where love bloomed amidst hardship and two broken souls found healing in each other's arms. I'd love to know where you're listening to this story. Are you driving through the mountains, sitting by a cozy fire, or perhaps falling asleep to tales of the frontier? Please subscribe to From Wild West channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your stories and reflections make our community richer, just as Abigail and Caleb built their community one friendship at a time. Until we meet again on the dusty trails of another tale, keep the spirit of the West alive in your hearts